Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teeth Matter. I'm your host, Ellie Halebian, DDS, and in this episode, we're chatting with the one and only Dr. Jon Marashi. A renowned industry leader and innovator in cosmetic dentistry, his loyal clientele includes an impressive roster of A-list actors, musicians, athletes, and Hollywood executives. Dr. Marashi's uniquely high-tech, precise, and artistic approach to cosmetic dentistry has garnered the attention of top media outlets, including Vogue, GQ, Esquire, Vanity Fair, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. In addition to his private practice, he launched his signature M-Sonic luxury toothbrush in 2019. Dr. Marashi was also on the founding team of Byte, a disruptive oral health care brand acquired by Dent Supply Sirona in 2020 for a staggering $1 billion. When not in the office, you can find him shredding on his skateboard. And today, we're diving into an inspiring story of how Dr. Marashi turned his passion for dentistry and entrepreneurship into a billion-dollar success. Let's dive into this conversation. Dr. Jon Marashi, thanks so much for being on Teeth Matter.
I'm excited to be here, Ellie. Thanks for having me.
It's a huge, huge honor to have you, and we have a lot of topics to cover, but I want to start with this first question because I think it's a fun question to ask you. If you were walking down the street and someone who had no idea about dentistry, let alone cosmetic dentistry, approached you and asked you, what do you do for a living and why do you do what you do? How would you respond to them?
Good question. I think I would tell people that I give people their confidence and make them feel better and look better about themselves through their smile. That's how I would frame that.
And why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? You know, there's only two things I wanted to do my entire life. I was either going to be a dentist or a professional skateboarder. That's it. And the way that the cards fell, I ended up being professional dentist, amateur skateboarder. So probably worked out just fine. In fact, I started skateboarding when I was 12 and I just turned 50 this year. So it's kind of neat. 38 years later, I still got to do the thing that brings me so much passion. But I can remember as early as middle school, just being captivated with smiles. And like when I started noticing, like some of my female classmates way back, the ones that I always had a crush on, they had braces. I mean, isn't that wild? Because in my mind, it was like this jigsaw puzzle waiting to unfold. And I knew what was coming. It was going to be this beautiful smile. Part of it may actually have to do with I didn't have braces as a kid, and it was something I always wanted, to have like a better looking smile. So it's something that has earliest memories, I always remember being focused on it. And having a love of science and working with my hands and liking smiles. I mean, doing aesthetic dentistry. I mean, it's like the absolute perfect pairing for me.
Right. It's interesting how you were so fascinated at a young age, and now your name is associated with Hollywood, with celebrities and glitz and glam, and a lot of that people associate with financial success. And they forget that you were once a dental student, graduating as a broke dental student, like many of us.
Very broke.
Can you describe, at least let's go back a couple of years now and describe maybe the first couple of years out of dental school. What did that look like? And also, what were some decisions that you made that led you towards financial growth?
Yeah, so it was a great question. And, I think a lot of us who go into dentistry, we choose it for a multitude of reasons. And I know baked into that equation for most people, aside from enjoying dentistry, is the desire to help people. And there's also a component of wanting to have a good life. And, so you think about that, you're going to spend all these years in school and training, and you want to come out on the other side, being financially stable and being able to, to have a great life. And I don't think very many people go into dentistry thinking that they're going to be, billionaires or anything like that. They just know hey, if I work hard and play my cards right, that, I'm going to be able to provide for a family and have a nice life. And I think that relative to the amount of work that goes into becoming a dentist is a very fair and reasonable expectation. I don't think that, even from the time that I entered dental school, And
Mhm.
especially now, because things have just become exponentially more expensive, that any of us realize, like the magnitude of the cost of a dental education. And I don't think that there, was any sort of economic counseling either about, okay, if you're going to incur this level of debt going into it, you need to think about what your life is going to look like with debt repayment and, weigh that against, what your potential income is going to be as well. So, it's one thing if you're blessed and your family is able to help you and you come out of school debt free and you can just start working and making money, right? But
Right.
so I think coming out of school, I was very cognizant, like, wow, like I owe a ton of money. And, I went to NYU, graduated in 2001. And I want to say that my debt coming out of school at that point was probably around like $270,000. That was like,
Wow.
it
Okay.
was like such a ridiculous amount of money, at the
Right.
time. It was stressful for sure. If you think about like how on earth am I going to be able to pay that back? And what I would say is two things. Number one, fortunately, the type of dentistry that I am most passionate about, you know, also happens to be on the elective side of the spectrum. So doing aesthetic dentistry, will allow you to do fee for service dentistry, and if you can become exceptional at it, then people are willing to compensate you more for it, and that obviously makes a big difference in the grand scheme of things. Um,
Right.
so the math on that equation would be totally different if you come out with that debt load and you're like, okay, well, maybe I want to have more of a modest type of practice in underserved areas where compensation is not as high. And I want to be very clear about something. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, we need people who want to service, those segments of our community, and I tip my hat towards them because everybody wins at the end. Everyone, there needs to be access to care. But there are, when you're choosing how you're going to practice and where you're going to practice and so forth, there are economic realities that come with it. And I think that that's where there's just a lack of insight and a lack of education on the part of the dentist of what it actually is they're signing up for by the numbers. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So, when I came out of school and then I went and did my residency, which, that paid, peanuts. And um, I started thinking about this. Like, job number one for me was like, okay, I just got to, I was just trying to stay afloat. And even after I got out of my residency and started working as an associate for my first couple of years, I wasn't making very much money, relative to what my debt was and relative to the cost of living in New York City. So, it was really lean, just trying to, afford the cost of living and to do some debt retirement on my loans, which was basically just, barely covering your interest payments. And I think a lot of young dentists get stuck. It wasn't until, let's see, 1, 2, 3, I was about 3 years out from dental school when I had bought my first practice. Probably one of the best pieces of advice, financial advice that I received from my accountant was, he said, look, he goes, if you do 30 years on this, paying it off, it's going to be slow and painful. So what I recommend you do is double your payment every month starting now. And I was like, how much? But what it did is it cut the 30 years, down to 15. And
Mhm.
it was, those were tough checks to write, especially in the early years, where you're not making as much, but
Right.
you end up saving, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the interest over the life of it. And I still remember making my last payment on it, so, I was kind of well into my career at that point. I was, um, 12 years into private practice, if you're on my own, if you're not counting like associateship and residency,
Mhm.
and just watching that go away, it was so great. Yeah, and if I had to go back and do it again, I actually would have pared my lifestyle down even more. I mean, I wasn't like living super large those first few years out of school anyway,
Mhm.
but it's like if you're willing to endure a little bit more and live a little more modestly, I probably could have got it done in 10 and
Wow.
saved myself even more money. And that would have, opened up uh, a lot of extra money for doing other things with, whether it was quality of life or investing and so forth.
It's very much the position that I'm in right now. I'm living in New York City. I also went to NYU. The cost of tuition has since risen, and there's a very big hole in my pocket. So now a lot of people tell me the best thing you could do for yourself is to open up your own practice. And a lot of times when people are looking to make that switch and open up their own place, it's a very big decision to make, right? It holds a lot of weight. You get really emotional about it. And I think a lot of people get emotional in the little things like the aesthetics, the equipment, and everything in between. Can you maybe describe your first practice? Because I feel like it must have been very different. It must have been very different to what you have now. Also, maybe um, if you knowing what you know now about buying your first practice or owning a business, what would be something that you prioritize?
So, what a lot of folks don't realize, and this is about the business side of dentistry, the thing that matters the most is a stable stream of earnings or a stable stream of revenue, a stable stream of income that's coming into the practice. So, I would encourage anyone who's looking to go and do it on their own to purchase
Mhm.
an existing practice. Do not start from scratch. Unless you're in some wildly underserved area where there's going to be a line of people around the block waiting to come in your door and start putting quarters into the machine, bad idea. Like a lot of folks get excited about building a practice from scratch. They're like, oh, I can do it my own way and get this equipment and all of this. But what happens the day you open your door? You have no patients that are in there. And so now you've got to borrow money for working capital. So you're borrowing debt to pay your debt. That doesn't even make any sense. And it takes years to build up your patient roster that you're going to have a stable number of people coming in for routine services and for like hygiene and for needed restorative services or whatever type of dentistry that it is you're doing. My first practice that I bought was from this wonderful gentleman, and he was in the same space for 31 years. And he was actually retiring because he started getting numb in his arm. It was really unfortunate. 31 years, guys in the same place, wonderful human being, out in bridge practice, fee for service. And it was just a complete diamond in the rough for me. And when I say in the rough, I just meant because he wasn't doing very much on the aesthetic dentistry side. So when I walked in, the place looked like it was still out of like 1978. The equipment was old. The furniture was old. Like the wallpaper was old. It had ugly carpet on the floor. I didn't care about any of that. What I cared about was the patient roster because, you could look and see that there were people coming in year after year after year. And as I've gone through my career and I've had other successes in business, I've learned a lot about business and startups and how all this stuff works. And most startups will fail within 5 years. So that's a statistical like fact. And so imagine, of all the things that could cause you to go under in your business, okay, running out of money, not having enough patience, not, like the staff, like there's a million things that can go wrong, right? Like, choosing the wrong location, whatever it is. Imagine if you could just de-risk the whole situation and just skip that part 100%. Just skip it and go right to the front of the line where there's something that already works and it's been working for years. And now all you got to do is just basically go in there and not screw it up and slowly over time incorporate how you want to do things and grow the thing over time. I've done that twice in private practice and it's been a beautiful formula. Like I never focused on, having fancy equipment in my office. You can buy the fancy equipment over time, when the cash flow allows you to do that. But
Mhm.
doing it this way, never once in my career have I ever had to worry about making payroll. And that's just a wonderful way to go to bed.
Mhm. How do you manage the staff that currently exists when you buy that practice? What if they don't align with your vision? How does that
Well,
turnover look like?
Yeah. So, turnover is going to happen. It's a guarantee. And, a lot of it is going to be luck of the draw because some people, are going to buy into your vision. Some people just get scared of the new owner and they bolt. And some people, most of them, I think, are actually willing to give you a fair shake. And,
Mm-hmm.
my recommendation is to give them the assurances that their job is safe. You want to honor the tradition of the practice, that you want to take care of the patients in the same way. So to them, it feels like business as usual. Because people are afraid of change in general.
Mm-hmm.
What I found, my first go around doing it, you know, I think I probably pushed on the gas pedal a little too fast. And I had high staff turnover. And the saying, you don't know what you don't know. So this is older John looking
Right.
back at younger John. And, I probably could have done it differently or more strategically to have minimized that. And the second time I did it, I was like, okay, been there, done that. So, I know what I need to do. I know what I need to say, and I understand how to pace this thing, and not just from a staff retention perspective, but also
Mm-hmm.
from a patient retention perspective. Because if you have this practice that has this long history of patients coming in for certain services and the way they're treated and all this, that's their norm as well. That's why they keep coming back. So if you go in right away and you turn the whole thing upside down to, this new vision, now all of a sudden it's not the same place anymore. And you're going
Mm-hmm.
to end up getting a lot of, probably a lot of, mass exodus of patients and not even really understanding why. So you can slowly introduce these things over time. I'll give you an example. Um, with staff and, incorporating new things that I wanted to do, we would have team meetings and now I soundboard with them. And so rather than like doctor coming in saying, okay, guess what? This is how we're doing it now. And it just, kind of ruffles all these feathers is, I talk about what the problem is or the perceived problem is. And I ask them to spitball some ideas of how we can solve it. And usually in that conversation, the idea that I have of how I want to do things will come up or some version of it. And now it's sort of like this collective buy in of like, oh, yeah, this is a good idea how we should solve this. And,
Right.
that has been, very effective. In taking a crown and bridge practice and incorporating a lot of aesthetic dentistry into it, it wasn't that much different. Here you are and you're meeting all these people for the first time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, imagine, you're coming into a dental hygiene treatment room. Um, it's your first time meeting the patient. You check their teeth. And I would ask just a very basic question. I'd say, Mrs. Smith, it's so great to meet you today. And it's my first time looking at your mouth. So I don't even know, what conversations, have or haven't taken place. And I wanted to know, did the prior dentist, Dr. So and so, ever ask you about the appearance of your smile and if you're happy with it and if you're interested in knowing about options to make it look nicer. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who can get mad for asking that? No one.
Right.
No one can because it's an honest question. And so basically, the answers were always one of three things. Nope, never said anything and not really interested. Okay, so write that down on their chart. Nope, or yeah, I said something and I'm not really interested. Okay, yeah, write that down. And then the third was like, no, they never said anything, but yeah, I'd like to know more. And I'd say, oh, okay, cool. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we schedule a time for you to come back and see me, and we can talk about what some options are, and if there's something that makes sense for you, then then that's maybe a direction to go forward with. And so it never came across as being like doctor, all of a sudden this new dentist shows up and is trying to sell him a bunch of stuff. It was just about a conversation. And by asking questions, it actually empowered the patient. It gave them the power of choice where they could say, hey, yeah, I do want to have this conversation, or no, I have no interest in it. And what you'll find most of the time, especially in a practice that has a long history, most of the patients have not been exposed to that. And very few people, I think, in today's age, because smiles are so important and I think that they're revered now in our society, that, most people would be interested in knowing.
I want to just ask you questions before we go off on a tangent because I feel like there's so many things I can ask you from this point on. But one question is when you were looking for this existing practice, Were you looking through with a company or solo? Like, how does this work? Do you have resources that you tap into when you're looking
Yeah, so
for
you got
a
to put
practice?
feelers out everywhere. And
Okay.
the most common ways is to use a practice broker. And they're just like real estate agents for dental practices. Actually, mine, both actually, I found out through my lawyer. And because,
Oh,
yeah, because there are dental lawyers who handle buy and sell transactions and practices. And, when you're looking to buy a practice, you got to put a little team around you. And, you need a lawyer and you need a really good accountant and you should also have a practice management consultant too to help you do the review of books and records. So the accountants too have the clients, and oftentimes they know who's trying to sell because they're one of the first people you talk to about selling your practice is to your accountant. My lawyer was friends with all the dental CPAs. So, so I actually got, I guess, what you would consider off market listings. And so I think those are great ways of going about it. And, if I had to do it again, I'd do the same thing because sometimes the practice brokers will have great listings as well. I would probably do, a lot of direct solicitations because, you never know. Like if someone's been toying around in their mind, hanging it up or how they're going to transition their practice and with digital now, it's just easy to get in front of people.
right. Absolutely. You mentioned when you buy into a practice, right? The practice that you first bought was a crown and bridge practice, and you were so much more focused on aesthetic. I'm curious to know, where did your passion for aesthetics come from? Because I feel like aesthetics is now just recently trending in the last, I don't know, couple of years. Um, it's become more and more prevalent or more and more ubiquitous. So where did that start?
Back in dental school, I mean, I
Yeah.
told the story earlier about orthodontics and liking braces. When I started dental school, I thought I'd probably be an orthodontist because that was the only way I knew to get someone a really beautiful smile. And in my first year of dental school, it was probably like in the first couple of months, I got a trade journal in my mailbox, and there was the first article that I ever saw of a veneer case. I didn't know what a veneer was going into dental school, and it was someone who already had orthodontics, so their teeth are already straight, so ortho isn't going to improve the situation. And they also had tetracycline stained teeth. So watching what porcelain veneers did for this person, I mean, it just hit me so hard. I was like, my God, like I didn't even know this was possible. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I still have the magazine,
Mhm.
by the way, and I kept it
Really?
all these years. Yeah. And I just thought to myself, I don't know how they did this. I don't even know if I quite understand it. I just saw they put these things on the front of the teeth and it was insane.
Mhm.
And now I just got to figure out, how am I going to learn how to do this? And, at
Mhm.
NYU, as luck turns out, Dr. John Calamia was one of our professors, and he's the reason why these white things stick to teeth in the first place. He's the guy who figured it out. And so to have Dr. Calamia as a professor, and when I was in school, that's when they founded the Honors Aesthetic Dentistry program. And I was student number one admitted into it. So that was a real big deal for me at the time. It was a big deal for aesthetic dentistry at the undergraduate level
Mhm.
that they put together a program, where you could actually start doing these types of procedures.
Right now, the landscape in dentistry has kind of changed when it comes to looking for a job. I feel like there's a lot more corporate dentistry out there and a lot more insurance-based dentistry, which makes it harder for someone who's a graduating dentist to find a fee-for-service job. What would you recommend they do to secure a position as an associate in a private practice if they don't have the experience or maybe they don't have a portfolio of cosmetic work?
Yeah. So um, I don't know if your listeners are going to like my answer on this one, but my job is to report honestly because if things are sugar coated, you just like I
Mhm.
don't like giving people a false sense of hope. The
Right.
first thing you started to say about there are the jobs that are available are more corporate based and insurance based is 100% true. And the middle
Mhm.
class of dentistry, which was, the neighborhood, mom and pop practices and fee for service practices have greatly been decimated because of, DSOs coming in and gobbling them up. So it's created this
Mhm.
significant divide in dentistry kind of between like the low end and the high end, right? And
Right.
so because there's that middle area is missing now, there's fewer practices on the high end, which means, and here's the answer now, if you're getting out of school and you want to work in a fee-for-service environment, in more of a restorative-based practice or an aesthetic-based practice, you got to start planning for that before you even get out the door, which means you got to take advantage of all your opportunities in school to set yourself apart as an outstanding restorative dentist. That's number one. And number two, you better be ready to hustle and grind and fight your way into one of these practices, because there will not be a help wanted poster on the door. There's just too few of them out there. These positions are so far and few in between. So, and this is the part that no one wants to hear, that if you want it, you have to want it so bad that you're going to literally claw and fight your way to try to, to prove your worth and your commitment to someone else that said, yeah, I want this person, because there are, for every one of those positions, there's a whole ton of recent grads or people even out in the first few years that would want to work on that. So what's changed is the availability of these positions. And in order to get one, it requires an extraordinary amount of hustle in order to set yourself up into one of those, because otherwise you got to look at what your alternatives are. You either have to exist in the other structure, right, in the corporate structure or the DSO structure, insurance structure, or if you can't, if you don't want to do that one and you can't get into the associateship, then you got to go do it yourself. That's it. I mean, what else is there? That's what it is. And there's a lot of dentists who don't feel ready to go out and buy their own practice, which I get, and in the meantime, there's still realities, right? Like, you still got to work, you still got to earn some money, but it's just exponentially harder now than it ever has been before. So, my advice to you or to anyone who's listening to this is be very clear, set some intention around what it is that you're looking for, like what type of practice. Identify those practices because they are out there, and create a list and be prepared to figure out, to find a way to get in front of that person. Like how I did it, a million years ago, Dr. Calamia introduced me to Larry Rosenthal when he came and did a lecture at school. And, all the students went up and said hi to him afterwards. So there wasn't anything unique about that. But what was unique is afterwards, I asked him for his card and if I had permission to call his office. And, what's he going to say? No? like, of course, kid, and that's one of the advantages you have as being a younger dentist. It's like feeding a puppy dog. No one wants to kick a puppy dog. You usually want to pet it and feed it, right? But I followed through with everything. And I called and I said, introduced myself to the office manager. It said I met Dr. Rosenthal and he said it was okay that I could call. And I was, wondering if I could come in and watch for an afternoon. And that's what happened. They said yes. They said, come in and watch. And, in their mind, they were like, okay, well, we're going to throw this kid a bone and let him come in and watch for an afternoon and then that'll be it. But at the end, and I went in there and watched and saw these incredible things being done with aesthetic dentistry. My mind was blown. And before I walked out the door, I was like, in my mind, I was like, somehow, some way, I'm going to find a way for this guy to hire me. Now, how am I going to do that? And so, that began a whole series of other things that I had to figure out, like asking for a return invitation. Like, wow, this was amazing. I can't believe how you did this, and tried to think of smart questions to ask and sort of sliding in there, do you think there would be an opportunity where I could come and watch again? And, I made the mistake of saying yes, which, allowed me to go back again. And I always made sure before going in, I did my homework. I went down to the dental library and found articles that the guy had written and read those articles and had questions to ask going in to show like, hey, like this kid knows what he's talking about. He's trying to learn this. And then I would bring in my cases from dental school, like prep models and pictures and things like that. Say, hey, what should I do here? Everything and anything to show them like I was trying to develop my skill and I was making progress. And, when did I start doing that? It's like my second or third year maybe. And, by the time I graduated, I had kind of developed a history there. And I said, well, I better stay in New York, and do my residency, and so I can kind of be in the mix and nearby. And at that point, like my calls weren't getting returned as much, and the invitations were waiting. So I just started showing up. I just sat in the waiting room. Jackie, the office manager there, she's like, he can't talk to you today. I'm like, I'm fine. I'll just wait. He's got to walk out at some point, And she's like, it's going to be a long time. And she was always so nice to me. I love her. And just to like one time he lectured, I think it was in Boston or somewhere. So I took the train to Boston, sat in the front row,
No way.
and yeah, like, hey, it's me, And I mean, and that was an extraordinary amount of hustle that I did back then. Like he didn't have a help wanted sign on his door.
Right.
And then after, I asked him if he would consider hiring me. It was crazy. So he said yes. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have this chance. And then a week before I was supposed to start, he called me. He said, I can't do this. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, he's like, things change in my practice. It's not the right time. Stay in touch. Good luck to you. And so like my whole world kind of came crashing down, because then I had to go get a job, and was right out of residency because I still had, bills to pay. And I got a job working in, I know in New York we call them Medicaid mills. And I still remember my reimbursement for a pediatric occlusal amalgam was like a few bucks. And I did that job for 9 weeks, working 6 days a week. And it was like, like 10 to 12-hour days. It was miserable, just the worst quality dentistry. And, all these years later, I'm grateful because I really did see the other side of it, like at the kind of slumlord level of dentistry. And one day I walked out and I called him, and he answered the phone. I had his cell, and I told him how little money I made that day, and he laughed at me and he said, "Okay, you start tomorrow," and that was it, But that was like, I love sharing the story, because what a lot of people didn't realize, and for those who have known my career, they're like, "Oh well." I've had a couple of folks like, how'd you get so lucky that Larry hired you right out of school? But they didn't see, like, I planted those seeds for years, and I kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and trying to find a way to, to make something happen. That's the kind of heroic effort that it takes, to get to that really high level. And it's all doable. I mean, my God, I think the stuff that we went through in dental school was actually a lot harder than what I did outside to get that job. But there was just no playbook for it. Like, there was no how to at that point. Like, we had a how to and a roadmap telling us how to get out of dental school, right, and get a license, but nothing showing us what to do next. And so there was a lot of trial and error. And I think if people knew what those steps were, then it's just, you just got to dig deep and from within, and just and hit it hard every single day.
Do you think when you were in that Medicaid mill doing the dentistry that you were doing, did you ever feel like this is not a reflection of your potential?
This was called pay the rent. That's all it was. That's all it was. It's like I am here, because this other job fell through at the last minute, and not working, like that was not an option for me. I had to survive. So yeah, I mean, every day going in there was like, all right, let's see if we can just make it through. Interestingly enough, my first week in that place, I did 2 veneer cases, and just by asking people once again, like, hey, would you be interested in learning more about how to make your smile look nicer? So you'd be surprised. Even in my residency, I did a lot of veneer cases. People are willing to find ways to make things happen if they're really interested in doing it. But by and large, yeah, in that Medicaid mill, I mean, it was very rudimentary dentistry, nothing that I was overly proud of, but it was a good experience, to where, I can say, look, I did that. I was on the other side. I know what it was like. I know what it felt like, and it kind of made me appreciate, what I do now and what I had to do right after that, that much more.
Did it ever lead to any doubt in terms of like your skill set?
No, no, because I was so laser focused of where I was going to end up at, that this was just a speed bump along the way. It's like I had a setback, and I was like, okay, like I'm going to be stuck here for a while. I don't know how long, but I always looked at it. I was thankful for the job, because if I didn't have that job, I would get evicted from my apartment. That would have been a good situation. So,
Right.
it's like you have to find there's a positive that exists in everything, right? And so it's just, is your glass half empty or half full, or is it overflowing? So, I was thankful, like, hey, I got a job, I can pay the rent, and it's just giving me time. And like, I'm doing dentistry. No, it's not the kind of dentistry that I want to do, but at least I'm checking that, when you're in survival mode, you're just thankful to have like your bases covered. And and then in the meantime, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And, like I was still laser focused on trying to get hired with Larry, but there was still a very realistic and high probability it wasn't going to happen. So it didn't stop me from looking at other opportunities, but that was the one that really got the bulk of my mental energy and effort that I put out.
Let's go back to this idea of mentorship. Dr. Larry Rosenthal was there for you, and you said you hustled and you showed up and you went to Boston and you did all this. And there are a lot of people out there who, take on a job because they're promised mentorship and that falls through most of the time. And then there are other people who do provide it, but they are busy and they are managing employees, they have a business, they have other ventures like yourself, and then they also have a family. And so you don't, as a new student or maybe a new dentist, you don't want to be annoying about it, right? How do you kind of foster that relationship so that it doesn't become a nuisance?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm that guy now, right? Where I have people asking me all the time to come in. You're towing a line, for being the person that's asking, right? Because you're trying to get something and you're very smart to recognize that, hey, this person is trying to run a business. They've got patients to take care of, a staff to manage. They got a personal life outside of it, like a family and all this other stuff. Why on earth do they want to invest any of their time and energy into me? And so you really have to think about how you show up to that person. And what I mean by that is if you show up to that person's practice and you're just getting in the way because of, like I've kind of had a whole spectrum of young dentists come through where some of them want to hijack the conversation. It's unbelievable, and I'm just like, I can't get this person out of here fast enough because it's messing me up during the day. And, or some of them, well intended, ask the wrong question at the wrong time. And it's not even talking too much. They just didn't know any better. And that kind of messes it up a little bit too. And then you get some people that ask some really, like intelligent questions and thoughtful questions and are even mindful about when to ask those questions or asking if it's okay to ask a question, where, when they're in the room, like watching with the patient and so forth. And so if they're, so for me, like if I don't feel like they're getting in the way and they're showing interest and that they did a little homework before coming in and so forth, then I'll usually let them stay around a little bit longer, or maybe they'll get a chance to come back again. But how would I know if this person is, like growing as a dentist? I mean, you can kind of tell from the quality of the questions for sure. I think another aspect of it too is, like, have I seen any of their work or have they shown me like what they were doing then and doing now? Some are actually smart. I mean, look, it's all digital now, so you have pictures on your phone and say, can you look at this case and give me some feedback on it, and so you can kind of see um, uh, how the person is progressing it, and that's also a way the for the young dentist, to get a little bit of, on the fly coaching and mentoring of stuff that they're working on too.
Last question before I let you go. There are now terms like life coaches or people like life coaches and business coaches that are available to us. How important do you think they are with respect to clinical and professional growth? And at what point in life should you start to incorporate them?
Immediately. So, I do a fair amount of lecturing and presenting now, and a lot of it is because I feel like dentistry has been so good to me, and it's an opportunity now for taking the things that I've learned along the way and sharing it with an audience that can try to get cuts to the front of the line with, the things that I've learned to help them get better and faster, certainly, and and make fewer mistakes along the way. There are three principles that I live by, and I always tell this to my audiences of what I think about. Number one is know your outcome. You have to know what it is that you're chasing after and what it is you're trying to achieve. And the thing about knowing your outcome is that you're allowed to change your mind. Just pick something and start moving towards it. You can't just sit there, well, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. You're not going anywhere. Pick something, and if you change your mind later, no big deal. But pick something, have clarity around it. Number two, coaches and mentors. And this goes back to your thing. What I have found is that every skill that I've developed in my life has been a result of being around someone who was smarter and more knowledgeable and proficient at it than I was. There's a saying, it's better to copy genius than invent mediocrity. As a cosmetic dentist, I put myself in the room with the people who were exceptional cosmetic dentists. Basically, I always wanted to be sort of like the most inexperienced person in the same room with the most experienced person, because that was going to create, the greatest transfer of knowledge towards me. But it goes far and above and beyond, this thing of doing things with our hands and learning how to do this clinical skill. And there's probably a point of diminishing return, so many years out. I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that can probably do a veneer just as good, or if not better than what I'm able to do. So you have to think about all of these other skills as well. I wanted to learn to become a more effective communicator. And I had a patient in my practice that actually did this for a living. And so I hired her. And one of the most painful things you'll ever see in your whole life is watching a video recording of yourself talking to a patient. It is so painful. Like, you're like, why did I say that? And how come I itched my head over here? And there's this fidgeting and all this stuff. And I sound terrible. And I said so many this and that. So it was the first time I actually learned how to present to someone and how to control my tone of voice and my voice inflection and my hand gestures. And these are all learned skills. They do not come naturally. I have had a business coach as well to help me understand the mechanics of my business, because that's a whole nother monster. And the most that a dentist will typically learn it is just production and collection, and that's it. And there's just so many other deeper layers that have nothing to do with dentistry that have made me a very successful businessman, and I happen to be a dentist. And these principles are applicable to any type of business. I think a life coach is incredibly important. We put all our time in this one bucket of dentistry, but we are living life. Like, you can't lose sight of that. There is this life out there. I don't think that, we've all had our experiences and hardships and traumas and challenges in life, and no one is, like no one's excluded from that. But it's, how do we respond to it? How do we deal with it? And having a life coach, a therapist, people that I could soundboard with and try to flush stuff out of my head and get past things to move forward has been monumental in my life. And even just on top of a life coach, like paying more attention to my physical health, with fitness, diet, sleep, exercise, all of these things as well. I mean, there's so many things that you look at. And a lot of these things, they require time, and they also require resources. And most people think that you have to have a private coach and spend money on it. But my advice to all of you listeners out there, go to YouTube. All this stuff is there for free. I mean, my God, there's you can get so much of everything, and it doesn't even cost you a penny now. So, and then, when you get to the point where you do have money to, have one-on-one and so forth, I highly recommend for people to do that. But coaches and mentors is just incredibly important. And the last part, the third thing that I always advocate for people, is about discipline and consistency. And it is not a sexy recipe at all. But, it's really about rolling up your sleeves and going in and doing the work. There is no substitute for it. It is not glamorous. It is not sexy, not one bit. I mean, there was a point in my life, where I had three companies at the same time. I had my private practice, I had Marashi Oral Health, that was my sonic toothbrush company, and I was on the founding team of Byte, the clear aligners. And so you want to talk about not having much time in your life, and you're sitting there trying to, run 3 companies and I have my private practice, and then I'd have to work on this stuff early in the mornings before work and after work, nights, weekends, and, sacrifice holidays and, time with my family. And, there was, what I would say is that the choices that I made were nothing but choices. And so I don't believe in this whole concept of work-life balance. I think you just make choices and you just have an awareness that choices all have consequences, right? And as long as you're aware of what those consequences are, because consequence is not a bad word. Consequence just means what's the outcome of a choice that you've made. And so as long as you're okay with what it is you're signing up for, there's no judgment. You know, I work a lot still. Blessed, I don't have to at this point in my career, but I do because I really enjoy it. I suppose I could take more time off or, whatever, but, I am that passionate that I still want to go in every day and, do the hustle and the grind. And, I've had a lot of young dentists actually ask me that question. They say, well, look, you don't have to practice anymore. So why aren't you like sitting on a beach somewhere? And, you know, it kind of comes from, what it is that the sweetest part of success is the chase of it. It's the journey, and it's the growth, and it's the struggle and all the things that you go through to get there. And once you get there, you kind of look around from it. You're like, wow, that was awesome. Okay, what's next? And and you just find some other project to work on. So I find myself continuously doing that. But no, there's no substitute, once again, for picking up the shovel and digging every single day. And if you're doing that over a period of time, you're going to get better. You're going to get to where you want to go. And most of the time, I think people end up surprising themselves that they can actually accomplish much greater things than they ever thought they were capable of doing.
I completely agree. And you clearly lead by example, Doc. Um, if someone wanted to reach out to you or, follow you, where can they find you?
On Instagram for sure, and everyone always kind of slides into my DMs. Yeah, at
Do-
Dr. Jon Marashi.
Dr. Jon Marashi, thank you so much for being on Teeth Matter. It's been a truly, truly a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ellie. It's a pleasure to see you, and I'm very appreciative for this opportunity to chat with you and share some things with your listeners.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow our podcast, write a review, leave a comment. Anything you share with us goes a long way. And if you think a friend will appreciate this podcast, then make sure you share it with them too. Until next time, cheers.